Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Friday, July 14th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Indiana game in exactly 50 days. It is getting here 7 weeks and 1 day away. The game against Michigan in 134 days. We got to talk about freshmen today, and this is a show where I'm going to just sort of do a preemptive pump the brakes. We don't want to tell you any of these guys are going to be, All-Americans. No one's winning the Heisman out of this conversation, probably. But what we do want to talk about is guys who, in this year's true freshman class of 2023, who are some of the guys on the offensive side of the ball who you might see playing some kind of a role. This is not necessarily saying these guys are going to be the next Chris Olave, the next J.K. Dobbins, the next Maurice Clarett. Maybe someone would, but these are guys who you might see on the field making some kind of an impact this fall for the Buckeyes as true freshmen. And so we're going to bring on one of our super seniors, Tony Gerdeman of BuckeyeHuddle.com. It's been quite a while since he was a freshman. But Tony, let's talk about the offensive side of the ball. And I guess let's start with nothing against any of the players who play these positions. But if you're a true freshman offensive lineman, it is almost impossible for you to get on the field. If you are Lincoln Keenholz arriving in the summer as the quarterback with two established five-star guys ahead of you on the depth chart who have a year or two of experience more than you do, realistically, unless you're literally Orlando Pace, it is going to be very, very difficult for any of those guys to get on the field this year in any kind of meaningful, non-garbage time kind of way.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But the irony maybe is that if you're going to pick any of these true freshmen on offense to win the Heisman this year, it might have to be Lincoln Keenholz, who, is only going to play probably 4 games, but, it's going to be the quarterback that gets the most bets on that one. But yeah, I mean, we're looking through and, who can make an impact, and it's just really, really difficult for the offensive linemen, even in a situation where the Buckeyes went out and brought in a couple of transfer portal guys to shore some things up. So it's clear they're not happy with where they are. But then still to, what is making an impact for a true freshman? I think if you can get a true freshman in the 2 deep, that dude has done wonders. That's really, really good. Congratulations. And you can be in the 2 deep. You can be a backup and still redshirt. I think we saw Nicholas Petit-Frere do that as a true freshman when he was battling for, I believe, the right tackle job with Brandon Bowen, if my memory serves, and he ended up being the backup, but only played in the 4 games, and so he was able to redshirt. So you can win a job as the backup and still maybe preserve that redshirt, and if you can, then I think that's about as much as you can hope for from a true freshman offensive lineman.
Yeah, I think back to Harry Miller was out there a little bit as a true freshman in just kind of situations and late in the game against Miami where they're up by 70-something points, you're going to get guys in situations like that. And we saw these guys playing this spring and, guys like Luke Montgomery and Austin Sierveld and Josh Padilla and Miles Walker. We saw them play this spring and they did not look completely overwhelmed, but they're still just physically, there's a lot of building up to do and then being able to handle the stresses and the pressures and the physical battering you're going to take as part of a Big Ten schedule. A little bit of a jump from the high school level. So yeah, that's probably just kind of put a pin in those guys. And maybe next year when we're doing the redshirt freshmen who might take take that next step, maybe we're talking about some of those guys there. But some of these guys that I think we can talk about this year, let's start with the real obvious one. Wide receiver Carnell Tate. He was someone who you looked at the highlights, you looked at the track record, you looked at the recruiting ranking, you watched him this spring, you saw when he lost his black stripe, and just about everything there is saying if anyone in this true freshman class on the offensive side of the ball is going to put up some kind of significant number of yards, and we might be talking about 250 receiving yards this year. This is not, no one's predicting him to have 18,000 yards receiving this year, but 250 yards. The most likely Buckeye to have 250 receiving yards of the true freshman, to me, is Carnell Tate. I think he is. If I'm going to put my money on anyone to be an impact player of some sort this year, I think he's the guy.
Yeah, he's the free space. He's the number 1 draft pick. A couple of days ago, I had somebody from a newspaper in Texas DM me, and it was like, hey, who do you think is going to be leading Ohio State in receiving next year? Clearly, this person is trying to think about his dynasty college football draft league. and wanting to go ahead and grab a late flyer on somebody. So I'm like, well, you might want to keep an eye on Carnell Tate. And then I gave him the caveat, but, it's not always the outside receivers that are leading Ohio State in receiving. But, yeah, Carnell Tate he moved into the 2 deep in the spring and looked comfortable moving around. We saw him on the outside, saw him in the slot, doing whatever was needed, and was productive everywhere, and really came in with his head down and did everything that Brian Hartline asked him to do. And that was the number one thing that Brian Hartline kept saying. It's like, he's done everything we've asked him to do. And you watch him make plays, that's all great, but he's doing what they ask. He's working, he's doing things the right way. And then you combine that with his natural abilities. And this is a guy, you go back and look at his high school highlights as a true freshman, just still making ridiculous plays at that time. He's just a naturally gifted receiver and also a hard working receiver.
Yeah, he kind of has everything you'd want as Brian Hartline. And, seems like they were okay with his blocking this spring. That's always the least interesting and yet most impactful portion of a guy's game in terms of when do guys get on the field. And we'll talk about that again in a minute with one of the tight ends on the team. But yeah, he seems like someone who, if you're going to put money on, if you were looking for a dynasty receiver, and I'm sure some of you are, Carnell Tate is probably not a bad option there. Jelani Thurman, we'll see how much Ohio State throws to the tight end in the future seasons, but, if they are throwing to a tight end in future seasons, Jelani Thurman feels like he is, in line to be a potentially impactful receiver for Ohio State at some point. He came in, looked much more physically ready than I think I was expecting, at least this spring. Again, there's blocking that goes into this decision, and that is always a difficult transition for guys because you got to block a Big Ten size defensive end. So, okay, can you do that? That's a big ask. And so he's someone who I think on the receiving side of things, I would feel comfortable that he's ready to make some kind of an impact this year. And then it's just a question of, is he ready for the blocking side of things? Is he going to be able to get past enough people? Because they have Cade Stover, they've got Joe Royer there, you got G. Scott. This is a room where you've got a bunch of guys who are also probably in the mix for a bunch of balls thrown their way. And how much does Ohio State really throw to the tight end? And how many of those are going to be left for the true freshman who's 3rd or 4th or 5th in the depth chart? Not a ton, but it feels like there's a chance he develops enough during the course of the year to be in that conversation.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to what everybody has seen from him to this point that we would even talk about him, because right now, at best, he's the 4th tight end behind G. Scott, Joe Royer, and Cade Stover. And when you're talking about the 4th person at any position, it's like, well, how much are they really even going to do? But if he's able to just continue progressing, because we saw him, and you still have Bennett Christian, you still have Sam Hart, there are a lot of guys in that room, so he's got to compete with plenty of those guys. But the physical abilities and the potential, it is impossible to ignore. So it's one of those things where if he is even with guys, then is he really? If he's even, he's leaving, that sort of thing. And if you're going to play 12, 13 personnel, with multiple tight ends, 2 tight ends, 3 tight ends, you're going to try to probably find some ways to sneak him in there and see what happens. Because I do expect at least one point this season, he's going to make a play that make people, that wows them and has them looking forward to next year when he has more opportunities, and you can see what he can do after a full year of development, practice, and games.
And now let's move on to the last 3 guys, and I'm going to lump them all together because it feels like Carnell Tate is the most likely to be that impact player right now in terms of the wide receivers. The rest of the 2023 wide receiver class, all 3 of them talented, all have kind of different roles in the offense, and the guy who I think maybe people perceived as the most college-ready of them all, Brandon Inniss, wasn't in for the spring. 2 of the other guys who were in for the spring, Noah Rogers, Bryson Rogers, both, you saw them out there, you saw them making some plays, you could, you didn't have to squint too hard to see that there's a pretty bright future at wide receiver for Ohio State. So it feels like all 3 of those guys maybe have some different challenges in terms of where they are in, positionally, not having been there for the spring, all that kind of stuff. But it feels like you could see any of those 3 out there making an impact this fall. Is one of those 3 maybe the most likely of the 3 to be that next guy?
everybody's going to say Brandon Ennis, and I understand that, especially when you consider the slot situation. Caleb Brown transfers out, so you have Emeka Egbuka as your number one slot. Xavier Johnson, probably number two. Is there room for a number three like Brandon Ennis? I think, as Noah Rogers showed, he can play everywhere like Carnell Tate. 2 of his 3 catches in the spring game came out of the slot, including his touchdown where he broke some tackles. So I want to see what Brandon Ennis can do in fall camp. Noah Rogers having that spring and being able to make the plays that he can, and he can play everywhere. I think people need to keep an eye on him. I might go with him second. And Bryson Rogers was pretty impressive and pretty surprising what he was able to do. And he played a lot in the slot. He also played outside, made some tough catches. So I think he might be getting overlooked by everybody. But then also you don't necessarily expect or don't judge somebody by not making any catches as a true freshman. Don't judge somebody by not making any catches as a redshirt freshman, because as I will always point out, Terry McLaurin, Paris Campbell, Johnny Dixon, these guys didn't have a catch until like their 3rd year on campus. So I think Johnny Dixon maybe had 1 as a redshirt freshman. The other 2 didn't. And, Paris Campbell started 3 games as a redshirt freshman in 2015 and didn't catch any passes, dropped 1 famously against Virginia Tech, which he still thinks about. But, now Paris Campbell has a second contract in the NFL. Terry McLaurin has a second contract in the NFL, and Johnny Dixon, doing well in the USFL or XFL.
USFL. And Michael Thomas also was Michael Thomas, his sophomore year, literally didn't play. They redshirted him. I think he had 2 catches in his freshman year. I think it was like 2 catches, 13 yards or something like that. And then didn't play at all his sophomore season, his second season. And whatever happened to that guy, I don't remember. Working somewhere in New Orleans, last I heard. But not sure what he's doing. But yeah, this is one of these, if a guy is an impact player as a true freshman again, let's define this, making some plays as a true freshman in some kind of meaningful way. You don't need to be a 1,000-yard receiver as a true freshman. If you're just getting on the field with as deep as this wide receiver room is, that's really going to show me something. That's going to show me something if it's Jelani Thurman in the tight end room. But all of those guys, really possible players to be able to call this watch list season. This is Ohio State true freshman impact player watch list season. I think those 5 guys all fit the bill for someone who might end up being the true freshman that your less informed Ohio State fans, in October or November, going, hey, who's this guy? Where'd he come from? Well, you'll know because you just listened to it. And guess what? You're going to know about the defensive players the next time we do a show, because we're going to, on Monday, we're going to be looking at the guys on the defensive side of the ball who kind of might fit this bill as well. So a little bit of just a little file this away for the future kind of thing. So you should know what's potentially coming this fall during what should be a very fun Ohio State football season. And if you want to know what's coming this fall, what's coming this summer with recruiting, what's coming as we head into Big Ten Media Days and fall camp for Ohio State, the best place to stay up to speed with all of it is at BuckeyeHuddle.com. We have our fantastic team of insiders covering the team, covering recruiting, covering X's and O's, making you a smarter football fan, making you a smarter Buckeye fan, all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. So sign up there today. Get access to our fantastic community on the Huddle board, which is members only. Get some great insight and analysis, especially on recruiting right now. There's a ton going on in recruiting. Alex and Mark have been keeping very, very busy on all of that, keeping you up to date on what's happening. Got some potential commitments coming in the next week or two. All that and more at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.